Hey, hello, how are you? Check out the city. Isn't it cool looking? Okay, that building right there, the big one, that's it used to be the NCMB headquarters, North Carolina National Bank. Well, it's still the NCMB headquarters, but now they call it Bank of America. You see, we acquired banks as we grew. We were a very small bank and trust, and we started in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 1987. Not many people remember the financial crisis in 1987. They fail to remember the stock market crash and the savings and loan scandal that followed. Uh, Banks were closing their doors, and people lost property and they lost their savings, and it was a scary time. Um, I had a great morning today. Uh, I love this view of the city out here. Right there, check it out. Boom. It's that's the Hearst Tower right there. I was so excited when they were building the Hearst Tower. I had just read this book, The Fountainhead, and when I found out that we were getting a Hearst Tower, I was excited because I thought that meant really good things for me. Well, the good things turned out to be a little bit different than I thought they were going to be. They're still good, but it was not as easy as I thought it would be. Uh, I'm going to read a obituary that I just read today. This comes out of the LA Times. And the obituary is about a woman named Dagmar Wilson. She got to be 94 years old when she died. 94 is a pretty good age. I'm into it. I feel 94. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read properly, but at least you can see how I read. Dagmar Wilson dies at 94. She was an organizer of women's disarmament protesters. At the height of the Cold War, this illustrator and mother of three organized 50,000 women to demonstrate against nuclear weapons. And foes tried to paint her as a communist, but they failed miserably. In 1961, the Berlin Wall went up, the Cold Arms race was on, and Dagmar Wilson, a storybook illustrator and a mother of three, steamed into the national spotlight. She was self-described as a non-joiner. Ms. Wilson sparked a movement that on November the 1st, 1961, drew an estimated 50,000 women from across the country out of their homes and offices and into the streets to demonstrate for disarmament. Women Strike for Peace. Women Strike for Peace, WSP. The loose network of activists she founded mounted the largest national women's peace protest of the 20th century. And that helped push the United States and Soviet Union into signing a nuclear test ban treaty 2 years later. These protesters were not radicals, although Red Hunters tried to portray them as such, and they failed miserably. They were, kind of like Wilson, well-educated, middle-class women in white gloves and tasteful hats who were impelled by fears of radioactive milk and impatience with the men who ran peace groups and governments. You know how men are. They talk in abstractions and the technicalities of the bomb, almost as if this were all a great game of chess. Well, it's not. Wilson said shortly after the protest, "There are times, it seems to me, when the only thing to do is let out a loud scream. Just women raising a hue and crying against nuclear weapons, for all of them to cut it out." Wilson, who was active in Women's Strike for Peace through the early 1970s, died of natural causes January the 6th in Washington, D.C., said her daughter Sally M. Ballin. She was 94. She was born Dagmar Sershanger in New York City on January the 25th of 1916. She grew up in Europe, where her father was a CBS radio correspondent. She then graduated in 1937 from the Slade School of Fine Art in London. And soon after, she married Christopher Wilson and moved to Washington, where he was a British embassy officer. When the 60s had dawned, she was raising 3 children, all girls, and she was also managing a busy career illustrating children's books. She eventually had 50 titles to her credit, including the very classic Poems to Read to the Very Young. She published that in 1961. In September of that same year, the philosopher Bertrand Russell, he was 89 at the time, was arrested for his part in an anti-nuclear bomb demonstration in London's Trafalgar Square. The night of the arrest, Wilson and her husband were hosting a cocktail party at which she expressed her anger at Russell's jailing. I just felt like chartering a plane and going over there to picket the jail, she said, but none of her guests seemed to share her alarm. That's how much she cared. Nobody else cared, but she wanted to go picket the jail. The next day, she began calling every woman she knew. Soon afterwards, a small group met her in the living room, and they decided to call themselves Women Strike for Peace, and conceived a plan for women to leave their jobs and kitchens for a day in protest of what they believed was impending planetary crisis. Word spread through the church groups, the PTA networks, and the women's clubs. And 6 weeks later, tens of thousands of women in 60 cities, including 4,000 women in Los Angeles, were mobilized. President Kennedy watched from a White House window as Wilson's group of 1,500 women demonstrated at the foot of the Washington Monument. That day, the group sent letters to the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, and her Soviet counterpart, Nina Khrushchev, imploring them to speak to their husbands about disarmament. At a news conference 2 months later, the president said he had received the message of these extremely earnest women who were concerned, as we all are, of the possibility of nuclear war. In 1963, he signed a partial nuclear test ban treaty with the Soviet Union. Wilson's high visibility in the protest made her a target of the House Un-American Activities Committee, which subpoenaed her in 1962, along with other Women Strike for Peace members. Dozens of women packed that hearing, turning a somber inquisition into brilliant guerrilla theater. Whenever a woman rose to testify, another woman rose to present her with a flower, and when she was done speaking, she received hugs, kisses, and applause. When it was Wilson's turn to come, she was given a full bouquet. She used humor to resist the committee's efforts to smear her as a communist sympathizer. Would she, the committee asked, allow Nazis or fascists to join the organization? If only we could get them, she replies. Would she permit communists to hold leadership positions in the group? Unless everyone in the world joins in this fight, then God help us. The next day's headlines were not flattering to this committee, which had destroyed the reputations of many men and women over the previous decade. One headline was particularly succinct. Peace gals make red hunters look silly. Wilson said later that her appearance before the committee was probably the one great moment of my life. By the end of the decade, a new generation of activists focused on U.S. involvement in Vietnam had flowered. Wilson had withdrawn to a quieter life as a landscape painter in Loudoun County, Virginia, where she was involved in local environmental and peace groups. In addition to Ballin of Burlington, Vermont, she is survived by her daughters, Claire of Silver Spring, Maryland, and Jessica of Mount Gilead, Virginia. She has 2 grandchildren and also 2 great-grandchildren. One of Wilson's last major acts for Women's Strike for Peace was a peace mission to Hanoi in 1967, shortly after U.S. bombs began to fall on that city. In her book, The Price of Dissent, a 2001 collection of oral histories, she described waiting by a bombed-out bridge on a moonlit night and recalling how she had gazed at the same darn moon before leaving Georgetown 2 weeks earlier. It gave me an uncanny one planet feeling, she said. We all live together on one earth. Can we do it in peace? I still cherish that dream. It's not that bad. Pretty good story, you know? Somebody lives a life, and they're so unafraid that they don't care, because they do care. That's the point, is they care so much that they make it appear like they don't care. Not that they make it appear as though they care so much that they really don't care. And that's what makes this country great. People like her. People like Ms. Wilson, who get to live a long life to 94 and leave a long legacy behind. That's what I like. I hope you're having a good day wherever you are. But look at this stuff. Check it out. Isn't that cool? Yeah. So, I am alright. And I am being well taken care of. Thank you. I hope you're okay too. I got to go out to some parties last night and I didn't really know anybody, but I had a really good time. Thanks. I miss you a lot. And these are happy tears, okay? Happy tears. Okay? I'll see you later. Bye.